welcome to this week's Flash Friday Finance Update. I am delighted to welcome Elizabeth Michael. Elizabeth works and owns City Pacific Lawyers in Victoria and has been a lawyer for 30 years. And we were discussing legal nightmares for first home buyers, and we thought we should share some of her insights into how to protect yourself, and particularly some of the stories that have come up when clients have been in issues and why you need maybe a lawyer to review your contracts prior to doing too much. So Elizabeth, give us your best shot. What can you tell us and share?
Hi, Louise. Thank you very much for that. Look, the main message when you're going into the property market is that you really have to protect yourself. The main concept is a lovely Latin term called caveat emptor, which means buyer beware. And so effectively what that means is that the burden is on a buyer to do their proper due diligence in relation to the property. And that comes in a number of forms. One is your own visual inspection of the property. What appliances, chattels are coming with the property, what's not included. The other aspect is the legal documentation that goes around the purchasing transaction. So in Victoria, which is where I'm located, there's the contract of sale, and then there's a Section 32 vendor statement. And those are largely dictated by what's required to be put in a document to disclose to purchasers all the things they might need to know about purchasing that property. So what are the rates? What are the other outgoings? Is the property a member of an owner's corporation? Those are all really important aspects to understanding what you're buying. The problem is that the industry, the conveyancing industry, is dominated by non-lawyers, and the document that you receive from the estate agent may not necessarily be compliant with the legislation. So even though the legislation says it's got an A, B, C, and D in it, and it's only got A, B, and part of D or whatever, you're not to know unless you get a professional to review the documents for you. So if there's one message out of this little chat is protect yourself by getting documents reviewed before you sign them. Well, like most people, buying a house or property is the largest purchase you'll make in your life. It's perfectly fine to go into a transaction if you know what the risks are. Oh, that roof's leaking. Okay, I know that when I move in, there's a leaking roof. I'm going to have to spend some money doing it. That'll affect how much I'm prepared to pay for the property. What you don't want is the unknown risks, because they cost money. Risk equals money.
Give us an example of a risk that you've had that a client didn't realize and had signed a contract. Sure. And maybe then you discovered it later.
I can think of a very good example of that, which kind of has a lot of issues in it. We had a first home buyer attend the open for inspection prior to an auction. She was there with her mom. Mom was helping with the deposit, not an unusual circumstance. And they attended the open for inspection about 30 minutes prior to the auction. And there weren't a lot of people there. This was at a time when the property was in a bit of a market, was in a bit of a lull. It was a cold winter's day, and they thought, well, we'll go outside and wait for the auction to start. And they were sitting in their car with the heater running. And then after about 30 minutes, they see the estate agent wander out and start rolling up the sign or the flag and taking it in. So they race over and they go, hey, what's happening? Where's the auction? They go, well, there's nobody here, so we're not holding the auction. But if you're interested in putting in an offer, we can talk. So during the course of that weekend, there was discussions about offers put. Long story short is that on the Sunday, this client signed the contract. And on the Monday, she rocks up at my office with a fully signed contract and says, oh, can you just review this for me? Now, that's problem number one, is that she didn't know what she'd signed. And so we said, yep, let me have a look through that for you. And it was immediately apparent there was a problem with this property. New builds, which are maybe between 5 and 10 years old, can have illegal, or they're not illegal. At the time they were put up, they weren't illegal, but now it's flammable cladding, and it's stuck on the outside of the building, and it's considered now a public health risk. And councils are going around putting building notices on properties and saying, look, this needs to be rectified. Now, the external faces of most of these unit developments are owned by the owner's corporation. The owner's corporation had already received the notice. It was all in this document. But what it meant was that each of the individual unit owners were going to need to kick in money to pay the cost of having this flammable cladding removed and replaced. She was completely unaware. So she immediately does not
So
want to.
what does that tell you about, first up, let's just talk about the real estate agent. Certainly been reviewing and looking at that. Could you have avoided this by actually asking the agent, or would they not necessarily disclose that to you?
Well, okay, there's this cute little thing that happens in that estate agents
Cute.
make representations about the property, but they themselves have not done due diligence on the property. Their job is to sell the property, and they may or may not have known about the flammable cladding. But if they said, look, no, there's no problem here, this is a brilliant new development, you're going to love living here, there is a clause in the contract which says that if an agent makes any representations to you, the vendor is not bound. So that means that you can't say, hang on, misrepresentation, misleading conduct, I wouldn't have signed this because the agent didn't tell me. It's not the agent's job to tell you. So basically, don't rely on what the agent tells you. You need to check it out and verify it for yourself. What occurred in this case was, and it is really a conveyancing nightmare, and I felt very, very sorry for this young woman who was really run through the ringer. So she immediately, I said, look, owner's corporation certificate reveals that there is flammable cladding. There's going to be an amount that's going to be levied against each individual owner. It's not yet known because they have to get quotes and whatnot, but it's going to be thousands. Because not only do you have to levy, but they're going to be constructing on the outside face of them. And do you want to live through that? So she's like, no, I want out of this. So I said, right, well, you can cool off. And not an ideal situation to be in to try to exit a contract. That's not to get into one in the first place. Anyway, but the agent, we notified the agent we were cooling off. The agent wrote back going, oh, well, you can't cool off because this has been purchased within 3 days of a publicly notified auction, in which this is true, that there is an exemption. If you buy 3 days prior to or after an auction that's been held, you can't cool off. But in this case, the agent told the client when he's out there rolling up the sign, look, we're not holding the auction because there's nobody here. You don't have an auction with one interested party, right? So, but after they had her and she'd signed the contract, they then did this massive backflip and said, oh, no, sorry, no cooling off rights for you because there was an auction. And she said, no, there was no auction. They told me there was no auction. So I said, right. So we had to go into bat for her. And we sent some threatening letters to their lawyers saying, if you're going to maintain that there was an auction, then I want to see an affidavit from the vendor's advocate, the auctioneer, and the junior agent that was there, all saying that they read out the auction rules, which you're required to do at the beginning of an auction, and that the auction was held, and you tell me, how many bids you got, and you just give me some details. So no one wants to go on affidavit and lie. So they quickly backtracked. But this poor girl, for 3, 4, 5 days, while the lawyers were
Back and forth.
back and forth, she was just absolutely in a state. And anyway, long story short,
very lucky. She was very lucky you had her into bat. She had you into bat for her, really.
Yes. So anyway, so luckily she got out of that contract, not without a fight, but and who wants to be in that kind of a legal battle? You don't. So the idea is, do a bit more due diligence. Her mistake was signing the contract. And the agent would have said, oh, look, this is fine, and sign it. And she believed him. And anyway, so eventually, happily, she kept looking. A few months later, found a property, and she's now happily in that property. So that's all good. But you don't want to have, it's kind of like being on the railroad tracks with a train racing at you and you jump off at the last minute. You don't want to ever get on the tracks if it's going to be that scary. So the idea really is kind of all roads lead back to just get things checked out early on so that you're ready.
Or try and avoid the drama around, if you can, around the auction. If you're going to auction, maybe you need to get the contract pre-checked. But if you have a 3-day cooling off, you could potentially sign the contract, but then take it to the solicitor or conveyancer to get checked. Isn't that correct?
You can do that, but I would always prefer somebody to have it checked out first. Yeah. So, and the other thing is there's certain very standard due diligence items you want to do, which is a building and pest inspection.
Totally.
Now, the idea is that, well, there might be some problems with the building, but if you're informed about that in advance, that's going to inform, if you go, oh, look, I'm going to need 10 grand to put a new roof on or whatever, that's going to influence how much you're prepared to pay for a property. And if you're a first home buyer, you know, you're kind of always running up to the budget and a bit beyond anyway. So on the complete other end of the scale, we've got a client who's buying a $6 million property, and he did a building pest inspection. And this particular property is in a pest prevalent area, but that wasn't the issue. The issue is that there's a sunken living room, and the living room is literally sinking. And the building report came back saying, you're going to have to do all this remedial work, there's damp and all the rest. He loves this property, and he can afford to buy a $6 million property, but he knows in future, I'm going to have to get this sorted. But it's better to know that than the nasty surprise of, because lots of things can be hidden by a nice fresh coat of paint. Yeah. And that's just the reality of things. So
yeah, totally right. Right. So any last words about advice for first home buyers? So
look, a lot of first home buyers buy properties that are in a unit development because they're often an entry point for people getting on the property ladder. Yes. And there's an owner's corporation. You need to have that document, which is required to be in the Section 32 statement, which tells you all about the goings on inside the owner's corporation. I looked at a contract on Friday, and it said, tick, no owner's corporation, not applicable. One look at the plan of subdivision, of course there's an owner's corporation. So that in and of itself is really important to be aware of, because is the insurance supplied through the owner's corporation for the building, or do you need to get that yourself separately? This is very important kind of fundamental issues that you need to be aware of. So be aware about what it's.
So you were saying the contract was actually incorrect.
The contract, the vendor statement, technically speaking, was incorrect. Now, if you signed that contract and there was no owners, says tick no owners corporation, but there is one, you can exit that contract. But if you go to settlement, a lot of in my practice, what happens, I get people who have done things probably very quickly and without a lot of care at the front end. They've signed the contract, they've gone in, they've settled, they're living in the property. Then they find out there's a problem. There's very few remedies on that end of the transaction. Your remedy is to get out of the contract, but once you've settled, those remedies fall away because the property is then yours, and you're then stuck needing to fix problems or comply with illegal building structures, whatever it is that could be there. So it's kind of like front end load the work and the due diligence so that you don't have nasty surprises out the other end, I guess. Moral of that story.
No, I love it. Great. Well, we will share Elizabeth's contact details. Will be in the notes. But if you've got any problems, know to ask us. I'm sure Elizabeth would take a call too. And we love helping first home buyers because it is so dangerous for you out there. And parents and those who often will be giving the advice won't know all the ins and outs of this. And they're trying to help you, but they might not have the expertise. So please do ask the experts anyway. Thank you for your time. It's wonderful to see you. Have a great week.
Thank you, Louise.
Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye.